TRE Talk Radio Europe.
Now, our first guest today tells the epic true story of adventure, tenacity and triumph over adversity. Flare Up is the tale of two rowers' near impossible journey across the Atlantic. Here's the author. Welcome to the show, Niamh McAnally.
Thank you so much, Selina. Great to see you, or to hear you at least.
Great to hear you too. So this is the story of obviously two people, one of them being firefighter Paul Hopkins, who I believe survived a brain hemorrhage.
That's right. He was in his early 50s when he had a brain hemorrhage. And as a result of that, it took him quite a few months to actually recuperate from it. And he decided at that point, he really wanted to do something with his life that would sort of underpin this new lease on life. But also he took this opportunity to just prove all the naysayers in his life wrong. He'd been bullied as a child and all of that kind of thing. So this was his moment to say, I'm going to do something really special.
Yeah, you hear all these stories, don't you? These people who are truly amazing because something so awful happens to them and they come out the other side even stronger.
Exactly. And this, he was told ahead of time that, this would be a life-changing event for him, but he didn't quite understand that. It wasn't until he was actually back and home and reflected back on how the impact of this row had actually changed his life.
Wow. Well, the other person, we'll get to that in a second. The other person is Phil Pugh. What's his backstory?
So Phil was also an adventurer in terms of adventure sports and outdoor activities. He was always doing these kind of challenges to push himself. Years earlier, when his son, who was born with cerebral palsy, was ill from birth, and they were concerned that he was going to die, Phil made a bargain with God that he was going to do whatever he could to stay fit and healthy so that he could support his son's dreams and his weight as he grew older.
Oh, and he obviously kept to his word.
He certainly did. And then at around age 60, then Phil said, I'm going to take on one physical challenge every year for the next 5 years. And as it turned out, this was his fifth challenge in those 5 years.
So they did together, is it called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge?
That's exactly right, the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. And that's a rowing race that starts out in La Gomera in the Canary Islands. We're down the road from everybody there on the Costa del Sol. And they row from there over to Antigua in the Caribbean.
Blimey, that's about 3,000 miles.
3,000 hard rowing miles in small little rowboats. Like their boat was 20 foot long, a wooden rowing boat.
And did they know each other?
Excuse me?
Did they know each other? How did they do it together?
Actually, well, Paul was a firefighter, and initially he had found a team of people. He was going to be four in the boat, a team of people from firefighters that he knew. But one by one, they realized that it was going to be a little difficult because the race starts in December and it can take 2 or 3 months to cross. And so his team kind of dropped out, and he was desperate to find another person that would row, so at least he could row as a pair. And it was a mutual friend of theirs who was a cycling buddy who actually connected the two of them. So they hadn't met before. And Paul actually learned how to row in order to do it. Neither of them were rowers, although Phil had a lot of experience kayaking because he'd actually done the kayak from Gibraltar down through to through the Straits down to Morocco and back. And so he had a little bit more experience at sea than Paul had. But together they trained and they made it happen.
I would imagine there's a lot of training to be done.
Absolutely. It took about 4 years before they could get to the starting line. And part of the training, if you like, is not just learning how to row the boat. They've got to learn all their seamanship. They've got to pass a certain amount of courses. The Talisker Whiskey Atlantic team behind it, Atlantic Campaigns, run a very safe race, and they expect an awful lot from their rowers to make sure that they stay safe out there. So there are various safety courses that they have to comply with. And also, in terms of equipment on board, etc. So yes, that's a big struggle. But the other part of the struggle for them is fundraising, getting enough funds to actually put the whole thing together, because it's not a cheap endeavor. And also they were fundraising for their chosen charities as well. One of them was Tiny Lives and the other one was the firefighters charity. So an awful lot going in while you're still holding down a job.
Yeah. Well, your feet are still on terra firma, I should imagine.
Exactly.
So I've got here that they did encounter major financial and physical setbacks. The financial side, I guess, is what you've just said, trying to raise the money.
Absolutely, yes, because it's not cheap to do it. And a lot of people they met had told them that, one of the hardest things is actually getting to the starting line. That the rowing part is the easier part, if you like, which is, extraordinary from our point of view who've been at sea. Think, oh, that'd be the hard part. But also they were supposed to start off in 2017, I believe it was originally, that Paul had signed up for. And he just couldn't get the money together in time or get a team together. So he had to postpone until 2018. And then in the summer of 2018, the pair of them were set to go in December of that year. Then Paul's knee locked up and he had to have a knee replacement. So that took another year to wait. So they finally got together to go in the December of 2019.
Crikey, your knee. I mean, it's your knees and your arms and that you're using most in rowing, isn't it? Crikey.
Absolutely. It's your whole body, your back, your arms, and your hands. And they rowed 24 hours a day. They alternated. So they weren't rowing together. Like one of them was either sleeping or preparing meals, or working with the communications and sending in the reports, etc. So it was full on. And
how long did it take them?
It took them, are you ready?
Yeah.
70 days, 9 hours and 11 minutes.
Oh my God. And those 11 minutes are crucial, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And even after those 70 days, on the final day, as they're coming in, there's a very strong current that runs the outside of Antigua at the southern end of English Harbour. And so that was like the final push. They were exhausted, but trying to get across that current and make sure they didn't miss the opening to the harbour. Otherwise, they would have been swept south all the way down to Guadeloupe, which wouldn't have been helpful.
Yeah. I read 30-foot waves. I mean, did they encounter any storms while they were doing it?
Very early on, actually, when all of them left, they encountered a couple of days of storms, right actually close to the Canary Islands before they broke free of that kind of weather system there. And they actually had to stop rowing. They physically couldn't be out on deck. So the pair of them had to squeeze into the little cabin, and they put out what they call a para anchor, which is like an underwater parachute, which kind of holds the boat in position against the waves and stops it from going backwards, hopefully. Although they did seem to end up after those storms further away from Antigua than 2 days earlier.
Yeah.
But it also, the problem with it is that it turns the boat into almost like inside, like they're in a washing machine. It's just the noise of the waves hitting and the kind of a spinning motion. They said it was the worst torture ever.
I'm sure it was. And you can't do a great deal about it once you're out there, can you?
Well, no, it's not like, you're running a triathlon or something like that where, okay, you've done the bike or you've done the swim and now you're on the bike and halfway you kind of say, okay, it's time to get off. I can't do this anymore. You're in the middle of the ocean. You've got nothing to do except keep going.
Yeah, of course. And I guess they had to get on. They were just them two for these 70 days. Did they get into some deep and meaningful conversations?
Yes, they did. And because the thing is, when you're out at sea, there's nothing, it both contracts time and expands time. And it gave them chances to talk to each other. Now, they were busy during the day. So what they decided to do was they would pick a topic to discuss every evening right after their evening meal, so that they had about a half an hour together. And they basically said they kind of solved the world problems while they're out there in the middle of nowhere. Some very, very deep, meaningful, like you said, spiritual conversations, and really got to appreciate wildlife and under, the stars without any pollution from land, light pollution, I mean. And also, into those sunsets where it's like the sun is like 360 degrees sunsets. It's almost like you're inside the sunset when you're out there.
Oh, it must have been beautiful. It must have been a myriad of emotions, gorgeous, rewarding, scary, upsetting, sickening. I'm sure they must have got seasick a couple of times.
Oh, absolutely. Very much in the beginning as well. The first sort of week, if you like, they were very, very seasick and dehydrated, and they couldn't keep anything down. And they had filled some water, some from a dubious tap that wasn't such great water. That made them sick. And then they were using their water maker on board, which is desalinated water. So it's not the greatest. It needs a time for your tummy to get used to it. But eventually, after about 6 or 7 days, they just got into their rhythm. And it became, row on. What's the next thing? Oh, I'm going to row some more.
And I read, Niamh, that they were both worried. Would their wives be there to greet them at the end?
That's right. Well, it turned out, first of all, their families would not have known exactly when they were going to come in. So in order for them to try and organize time off work, that would have been very difficult. The second reason was that it was financially quite expensive for them to fly over and get hotels, etc. So neither of the wives were actually there, which is how we ended up meeting them. My husband and I were on our boat, Freed Spirit, a sailboat, in Antigua at the time, and we found out that they had no family on island to greet them. There was a lot of people there, but none of their families. So we invited them onto our boat for a dinner on their second night they were there.
And how did you get to follow the story then? Is that when you first met them and that was when you had the idea for the book?
Yes, absolutely. What happened was we were actually on our sailboat on the dock in Nelson's dockyard there in English Harbour, and we'd heard word that somebody had said, "Oh, they're coming," and I'm like, "Who's coming?" And they said 2 lads are rowing in the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. And I had seen one of the rowboats from way back in the day in the dockyard. And I went, I cannot believe what that must be like to be in one of those. I can't believe we're going to see somebody coming in. So myself and my husband, Gary, jumped into our dinghy and we motored out to the edge of the harbour because it's kind of, the finish line is kind of a little bit obscured from view from back on land. And as they come through, I cannot tell you the emotions of the horns and the whistles and the blow, and everybody was like so excited. And they light these handheld flares and stand up in the boat. It's almost like their Olympic podium moment, if you like. And Gary had the dinghy circling them in an arc because the media boat was going in the opposite direction. So I was there with my camera and I started taking, almost like sports photography photographs. And I just got this one photograph of that moment. And that actually is what became the front cover of the book. And I was so connected to it. I was crying. I was like, I said, Gary, I will remember this moment for the rest of my life. I had no idea how much that actual moment would be part of my life as it went on, And so that night when they were on our boat for dinner, we started talking and they found out I was a writer. And we talked about the idea of my writing a book. And I said, well, who would you want to read it? Because if it's just for people who are going to row next year, just a small amount of people that are going to row, or it's like a how-to book about how to row an ocean, I said, that's not really in my wheelhouse. But I tell you what, if you would be willing to dig deep emotionally and spiritually and tell me why you did it, and like not the noble why you tell your friends or the press, it's like that real why that you tell yourself in the dark of night, why you did it and what drove you to do it and how did it affect you and your families, especially your wives and your children. And after you're back home for a couple of months, I'd like you to reflect on how you changed as human beings. Has it made a big impact, a difference? And are you doing something new with your life now that you hadn't done before? So I said, if we can do that, I said, that would be the story I'd be more than happy to write. And I wrote it in the form of a novel, even though everything there's true. I wrote it in the form of a novel, so it makes it an easy read, to follow the characters and everything that they had to go through.
And what's the answer life after the challenge? What are they doing now?
Well, Paul had to resign from the firefighting right before he took early retirement because of all the delays. He couldn't really ask for more time off. So he retired early. And he's now back driving an ambulance, believe it or not, for a different company. And Phil was a businessman and still is. He's still running his business and still very much involved with charities. But I'd say his changes are more in the family dynamic with his son, where he used to do all of the taking care of it. He's now able to stand back and allow his son grow into the adult that he is. And he's got 2 other children as well. But I think more in his family dynamic has changed. But for Paul as well, he appreciates the little things now. I think he's improved his family relationships as well.
Yeah, well, they sound like 2 amazing men, and thank you for bringing their story to light. We are actually selling your book on our website for our listeners, tre.radio. It's on our bookshop page, and it's by Niamh McAnally. It's called Flares Up, A Near Impossible Journey Across the Atlantic. Niamh, what's next for you? Because I know you are a writer, and you generally do write about your travels on land and sea, I believe.
That's right. Yes, I am a full-time writer. I'm based in Florida at the moment. We had been living on our sailboat cruising the Caribbean for the last 6 years. In fact, I came to crew for Gary, if you can believe it or not, about 6 years ago. And it was only supposed to last a month. And here we are. We just realized like that on the high seas, you get to know each other from the inside out, just like Paul and Phil had those deep conversations. So did Gary and I. And we realized there was a major connection between us, and we're since married.
Oh.
But, yeah, exactly. In fact, we were in Beckway in St. Vincent and the Grenadines one Thanksgiving when he proposed back in 2019. Yeah, and so that story has been written now. I've written the memoir for that, which is still actually looking for a publisher for publishing that. But what had happened was it's a story about my traveling around the world as a volunteer traveler all through the South Pacific, and helping families and small businesses with whatever they needed. And the final volunteer project was to volunteer for Gary to sail his boat from Florida to the Bahamas. And then I was going to settle down and come back to the States. Or I was actually originally based in Sark in the Channel Islands. And so anyway, I ended up on the sailboat and writing full time. So that's my next project, is to get that out there and get that published, and then work on. I'm hoping that we can put together a screenplay for Flares Up, because I think it would make an amazing movie.
Yes, so do I. Well, do keep us posted, and hopefully you'll come on the show again.
Will do. Thank you so much for having me, Selina.
My pleasure. Take care, Niamh. Bye-bye.
Bye.